Welcome to the Madness and Grace podcast, where we explore the connection between mental health and faith. I'm Dr. Matthew Stanford, neuroscientist, author, and mental health advocate.
And I'm Dr. Madeline Stiers, therapist and trauma researcher. We're so glad you're joining us today. Each week, we have authentic conversations about personal stories, we share professional insights, and explore the meaningful ways faith can influence mental well-being.
Whether you're seeking comfort, understanding, or simply a new perspective, we're here to journey with you. Thanks for tuning in. Now let's dive into today's conversation.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to this week's episode of Madness and Grace podcast. This week, we're going to be talking about mental health in the workplace. More than ever, people are looking for their employers to support not just their productivity and workload, but also their mental well-being. And so today, we're going to talk a little bit about ways that employers can recognize what's going on in their work environments, and then a few ways that employees can also take note of what's going on with their workload and their self working to identify burnout. We spend so much of our time, so much of our lives at work that it really doesn't separate from our well-being doesn't really separate from home life to work life. So they kind of integrate. And so if we are extremely stressed at work and not feeling well, that bleeds into home life and vice versa. So what do you think about that? How are you feeling stressed at work, Matt, today?
I'm not stressed today, but there are a lot of days I'm stressed. But, I think this is one of those huge issues that affects all of us, or at least most of us. And I think it's one of the things that we don't really think about. I think if people do think about work and mental health, they just think, well, work is the problem with my mental health. And so, and that could be true. It could certainly be a contributing factor to that, but it's not something that we really talk about. And really, we think about wanting to get away from work as fast as we can, and that'll make things better. But the reality is that there are a lot of expectations, there are a lot of boundaries, there are a lot of things we can put in place as individuals. There's a lot of things that employers can do to make the mental health of their employees much better. And I think, if we want to look at it from a purely selfish kind of monetary perspective, the first thing that people start to report when they talk about statistics related to mental health in the workplace is productivity. And so, problems with mental health in relationship to your employee, which does not necessarily mean that the individual's mental health is diminished by their employment or their job. It just means that they're in the job and they don't have good mental health. Their productivity goes down, so it costs your business money, and ultimately this is a human being that hopefully is part of a kind of a community within your job or your business, and and they have value, so you want them to do better. And as you said, mental health problems in the workplace very, very quickly bleed out into the family, and then very, very quickly bleed out into the society.
Yeah, I think that's a good distinction that you make. We're not saying that work is what's causing people to have poor mental health, right? It's really that it could be that. I mean, obviously, some people do have very high demand, stressful jobs, and that can have a negative impact on their mental health. But it's really, their well-being overall, right? And how that bleeds into the workplace and how that affects productivity and really morale. I mean, if you've got an employee who is struggling significantly and maybe having difficulties interpersonally and relationships at work, you really start to see a negative impact in the environment, and people maybe wanted to stay away from them. And that's really kind of the opposite of what we talk about in some of our trainings on how to recognize when someone in your workplace is struggling with their mental illness. I mean, I think what people want to do is not touch it with a 10-foot pole, say that person is really not doing well, and I'm going to stay out of it. But some of the trainings that we offer through our Gateway to Hope U is how do you recognize when an employee or a coworker is struggling, and how can you, gently approach that conversation without kind of stepping over some of those boundaries that we have in place professionally.
Absolutely. I mean, I think, on the positive side, a job or employment can foster a sense of purpose in an individual and connection, which can be tremendously beneficial to a person's mental health, mental well-being, however you want to describe it. But then on the other side, it could be, very toxic, chronic stress, just kind of an abusive, kind of overwhelming environment. We can really drag it down. So it's not that, work is always on the negative side. Work can be very beneficial. A lot of people find a lot of purpose and meaning in their job. And I think that was actually more so true in the past when people tended to stay in their jobs. Whereas now, when you more of a high techy kind of jobs that we have now, people kind of move from job to job to job, and people are at home a lot now, subsequent to the pandemic, and with hybrid kind of approaches. Where is in the old days, you see, the guy that went, the guy that was in the union and he went to the job place and he's going to work there his whole life, and his son or daughter might follow him, and there was real sense of kind of purpose and kind of connection there. And we just don't see that as much anymore. But when we're talking about, kind of problems related to mental health in the workplace, really, let me kind of give a little definition or suggestion to what those look like. So you mentioned one, and that's burnout. So burnout, emotional exhaustion, cynicism, reduced effectiveness. You're just kind of overwhelmed by the situation, and your productivity and your involvement really starts to dwindle. Anxiety, a person that's constantly worrying about performance pressures, or they're going to be fired, or their fear of failure on the workplace. Depression, low motivation, hopelessness, withdrawal. Then you mentioned also chronic stress. That's another one. So when a person's under chronic stress, that's like this massive cortisol load that they're letting out, a lot of emotional dysregulation, a lot of physical problems, heart issues, a lot of sicknesses, person's calling in a lot. And then finally, might say kind of a trauma response, for an unsafe or abusive environment, that could really cause an individual to start to isolate themselves, start to avoid those situations. And that's probably more on the extreme. Almost anybody would recognize that as a problem. But, I think, one of the biggest issues that I see is this idea of kind of a loss of meaning in the context of what a job or work is. And so a job becomes purely transactional.
You're right.
I go there, so you give me money, and that's it. And that's always going to not be healthy.
No, some studies have found that employees who feel that they have more autonomy in their day-to-day tasks can kind of make some of those decisions, obviously not large decisions, maybe that management or the executive level would be making, but how to kind of move through a project, feel much more happy and they feel more content with their job, as opposed to those who are told, you have to do it this exact way. Those people are not getting that sense of commitment and, passion maybe that you might have for a place of employment where you have a little bit more say in how your day goes and what you're able to do. And that leads to more burnout. I mean, and burnout isn't, I feel very tired today. It was a very stressful day. Burnout is really a larger issue. It's the chronic stress, the anxiety, the high demands that are going on consistently, or feeling unfulfilled and really disengaged with your job. I mean, when we talk about burnout from a clinical perspective, there's high rates of burnout in the helping profession because we have to emotionally give so much to the work that we do. We have to be on and present. I've heard horror stories of clients telling me that therapists have fallen asleep in their sessions, and I'm going, I don't even know how you get to that point.
I don't know how that's possible.
But it's I mean, this person has to be either ill, physically ill, like something's going on, or they're just so burnt out. I mean, that you're falling asleep in a session with a client is wild, but there's really high rates of it. And so being able to identify that it's now eking into my day-to-day life, like physically I'm not feeling well. And this level of what you mentioned earlier, the cynicism, in the helping profession, at least, it's really this like idea of, we get into it because we care about people and we want to help. And when you start to have those thoughts of like, this person, blah, 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 they just need to do X, Y, and Z. They don't care. This client is so annoying. You start to, they don't really want to get better.
Right.
Those thoughts start to come in. You recognize, this cynicism has come in, and I really need to take a step back and look at, for myself as an employee, what's going on and how can I address it? Is it that I'm not taking care of myself? Is it that the workplace or the workload is too demanding or too high
Right.
stress? Is this not the right fit organizationally for me? I mean, there's lots of things to consider with that. There's, I think NAMI did a study and they said about 52% of employees in 2024 reported that they were feeling burnout. And most of it
That's
wasn't
more common.
related to job stress. It was just stress in life, right?
Right.
The world is very stressful nowadays. And so people are hitting burnout and experiencing anxiety at higher rates. And I think that's why we do things like this podcast, is to bring awareness to mental wellness. And so people can start taking better care of themselves.
I think again, I think one of the kind of myths I'd like to break today is this idea that it's, when we talk about mental health in the workplace, we're just talking about, how the employee might see it in the context of my job makes me mentally unhealthy.
Right.
Whereas really what I would like to kind of conceptualize it as is to say, we already know that a majority of people don't receive mental health care of those who have mental health problems. That's just a fact in our country. And so, what the workplace is it is both potentially a contributor to a problem with mental health, but it's also a metric of trying to kind of something that finds the problem. And, because it's a very rigid kind of routine oriented, schedule oriented environment. You know what I'm saying? And so
Requirements and demands.
exactly. So you have deadlines and expectations and all that. And so when a person is struggling and they're put into that, they're less likely to be functional or be able to be successful. But also it can be contributing, because if you already come to that situation and you're struggling, whether you recognize it or not, and now you're put into a situation where you're failing, you're not doing well, or you start to decline, you were doing okay and now you're not, well, then that just piles it on top of that. So I think, one of the things I'd like employers to recognize is that, it's important to realize that people are bringing things to the workplace. It's not that they just leave that all at home. It's almost kind of like, we hear these kind of cliche-ish things of like, someone who had a failed relationship and then they jump right into the next relationship without ever thinking about why the first relationship failed. And they just bring the baggage with them, and so it's the same thing. If you were in a job environment, and you weren't successful, or you felt like you needed to get out of it because it was overwhelming you, or your mental health was declining, and then you just jump into another job without trying to kind of do an inventory of were you bringing to the job? What was the job doing to you? Those kind of things. It's the same kind of thing. So employers should recognize that, when we talk about mental health, we're not just saying, well, you need to fix your environment. And then for employees, we need to recognize that when we're struggling on the job, it's not always about the job.
Right.
It can very well be what we bring to the job. And it ultimately, at the end of the day, it's a combination of everything. And so, why is this happening now? Because there's no doubt, and you even mentioned, there's no doubt that we're seeing this more. Now, I would say at one level, we undoubtedly, when we do these surveys, find that a very high rate of people are reporting that they're burned out and stuff, is because that language is much more common in our culture now. If you'd gone back in time and, probably surveyed
50,
my
60,
grandfather,
yeah.
my grandfather who was a machinist, okay, my grandfather was a machinist who worked in this machine shop that I had been to, that I would describe as really little more than a cave. Okay. I mean, it was so dark in there and greasy and metal everywhere that, it was like who is it? What's the federal organization? The OSHA? Is that who did safety? That's like the safety. I mean, this was like an OSHA nightmare. Okay. But, he loved working there, and so, before that, he worked at a company that, he was a machinist for a large company that basically bottled or canned beer. Okay. And so, but he was a machinist. And so again, horrible work environment, but he loved that job. So, I think if you had surveyed him and said, "Hey, are you burned out?" He would have been like, "Burnout? I'm like, I love my coworkers and I'm thankful I have a job to support my family, and it's 1950, and so I think now we're really calm. Not to say that we don't have problems. I think I'm going to give you some ideas of why, but I think that language is more. But we also have a lot of different kind of jobs now. So one of the things I would say, and I have a real problem with this myself personally, and that is we're always on digital work and blurred boundaries. I mean, I was just making a joke the other day. I mean, I'm working 24/7. I mean, I really am. I mean, it's insane. Uh, and that's not, I think some of that's not just the digital aspect, some of it's related to the health profession that we're involved in. And that, I'm getting literally phone calls on the weekend of, I'm in the ER with my daughter and she's having a psychotic break kind of thing,
and personal boundaries, right? Being
right.
able to...
Right. I was going to say that. I mean, that's one of the things that's going to be one of the fixes. I have no boundaries. I mean, my boundaries are gone at this point because I'm so empathetic to these individuals, which again, it's just a reason. It's not an excuse.
Well, and so you're able in some sense, to pause and help at any point. You recognize that is not going beyond your limit. You're not stretching yourself beyond a limit to where you're burning out or as the young kids say, crashing out. Right. You're able to maintain your wellness, your well-being, and still help. And so people need to take an internal clock of like, am I able to do this? And if not, what should I be doing?
No, absolutely. I think that's one problem that's going on right now, why this is happening at the levels it is. I think another is the rising costs of living and a lot of financial insecurity. I mean, people are taking jobs to take jobs. And that's, I mean, I understand it, but it's never a good idea. It's just never a good idea. I think, there's a tremendous drive for increased productivity and demand within companies and with many fewer resources available to the employees. So I think that's another one. It's like, this week we did great. Next week, you got to do better. You got to do better. I think there's been, this is kind of the example I gave with my grandfather. I think there's real loss of meaning in relationship to work. It's just become very transactional and particularly with younger individuals. And we see that even in our hiring here. I think I would also add to that over the last, say, 5 years, I've never seen such unrealistic expectations that people have of their own value as an employee in the context of a new hire. And I'm not talking about, I value all of our employees. I'm talking about someone who comes in applying for a job. Their expectations right out of college are, I mean, the data just shows this. I'll just to give you an idea of a study that was done 2 years ago of graduating seniors, and the average salary in the U.S. for a graduating college senior 4-year degree across disciplines, so some make way more and some make way less, is $50,000. That's a starting salary. Ask graduating seniors what their expectation was for their first job, no experience. This is right out of college. Their average was $120,000. So more than twice what actually exists. So wow. Then there's this, then if you take a job and you had this unrealistic expectation of your salary value, and you take a job then it's just you're miserable. And so then finally, as I said, weak community supports. I mean, people aren't getting care out in the community, and then they come to work, and then they may blame their problems on work because they're at work more often and not recognize that they're just dragging this around. So there's a lot of things, I think, in our modern society that are driving a lot of this. But it's definitely something that we really need to do something about.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of, I've actually had conversations with a lot of people that early in their career were offered a position that is very high salary. And so they work there for a few years and they live a lifestyle on that salary, and they come to realize that they are being worked to the bone, and they're hitting burnout, and they're looking for something that has more meaning, and they want to feel passion for their job. And but the salary differences from what's actually market value to what they're being paid is so dramatic that they oftentimes can't make that shift, and then they end up feeling stuck, or they're not willing to make that shift, which I can understand. I mean, yeah, it's
or not. Yeah, they're not able. now that
Yeah,
they,
they're not able. Maybe they're stuck with
so
a mortgage and, it
absolutely.
becomes this whole big process and maybe they have a family to provide for. So, I mean, it is a challenge. And yeah, I think you're absolutely right. That community, that sense of relationship that people used to go out and have lunches and we still do that, but the internet is so much more available. You can just call someone. You don't have to say, hey, let's meet up for lunch. You can just call someone and chit chat with them. And I'm guilty of that. I like a
Or
very
email
much,
them or text them or even less
I'm very
connect
much an
them. Yeah.
introvert. And
Yeah. Right.
thankfully my friends are all, for the most part, very extroverted and they'll just continue to invite me places even if I can't go or decline, and so it gets me out of the house. But finding a community that is going to support you outside of work really does boost that wellness. So when you go to work, you're in a better place. It really is important.
I think that, I mean, I don't want to make just giant generalizations, but I'll go ahead and make one. And that is if your employment is, if you see it as just purely transactional, uh, and I certainly can understand that being necessary for a short period of time. I can understand a person that maybe loses their job and they've got to find another job. I can understand that. But if your employment is purely transactional, there's little doubt that over time that's going to hurt your mental health because you spend so much time on your job and now you find no meaning or purpose or pleasure in any sense in your job. And then the second problem becomes that people, I mean, particularly with men, I mean, what's the first thing that a man is asked when he meets somebody? And that is, well, what do you do? What do you do for a living? I mean, we are defined by our profession, our job. And so
I think most people are asked that.
I think they are now. I think there was a time, my grandfather, he was all, they never asked my grandmother. They just assumed she stayed home and kept the kids.
Yeah.
I think now that's grown, but we're all, we're defined that way. And,
Right.
Somebody who has what society looks at as a higher level job, which it usually has to do with the amount of money they make. It usually doesn't have a lot to do. I mean, a poet. I mean, I could look at somebody who's a poet or writes music who makes no money. I would look at that and say, wow, I mean, I've always wished that I could, I mean, which I'm the most non-musical person you've ever met. I love music, but I don't play anything. I mean, writing a song to me seems like the most incredible thing. But, most people that write songs never make any money, and so, but the thing is that, oh, well, I'm a neurosurgeon or something like that. Oh, you make a lot of money. That's looked at as a high level. So I think, we kind
place
of
value on that, which is
right. Well, our identity becomes our profession. So, and that's just not the reality of who we are. And so,
and
in fact, that's probably a nice, go ahead.
So you say, finding meaning in your work or having, if it's just purely transactional,
right,
then it's going to, at some point, maybe hit hard, your wellness. But I don't know if that's actually true. I think if you do not have a purpose and a meaning in life where you find fulfillment, then if your work is transactional, you're not going to be happy and maybe
right. No, I'd agree with that.
Wearing on you. But if, like, I know several people who they don't particularly care for the work that they do. Maybe it's in accounting and they were just at a big accounting firm and they're like, I don't have any,
right,
skin in the game, but they have outside activities or they're involved in their faith community or they're working with some sort of nonprofit, donating time. I mean, as long as you're finding meaning in relationship and in life and those connections, I think that can bleed into being able to manage work that is kind of purely transactional.
I think you make a good point there. I mean, it's having purpose and meaning, and that purpose and meaning may be in your profession.
Sure.
I mean, that's
like
I would say that I would
Absolutely.
say for us it is. It certainly is for me personally. But I also, we also work at a ministry. I mean, so I mean, again, I think it's not fair for us to use that as a real example because most people won't. Not only, number one, we're in the helping profession, which we literally help people every day. They come to us for help. And then secondly, it's a ministry in the context of our faith. And so that's not, but if I'm just, my job is that I put a nut onto a screw as it comes by on a conveyor belt. which, somebody has to do it. It's an important job in society. I may not find as much purpose in that, but so I need to not look at my profession as where I'm going to find all my purpose, my meaning, my identity. I need to find that out within the context of my broader life. And so number one, I would say, our identity is in how God sees us. I mean, like our identity is in Christ. And so I think we have to recognize who we are in that context and accept that. And then we live from that. And then I think one of the things I would say is if your job is that you put a nut onto a screw, it's very monotonous all day long. I think if you want for that to be more than transactional, you put it into a broader context. Well, why do I even go to work? Why do I even have a job? I have a job so I can support my family. I have a job so I can contribute to society. I have a job. I mean, it may not be the most, kind of enjoyable job I have, but does it have value in the grander scheme of things? I mean,
and
so
then
you look
have
at,
enjoyment and fulfillment outside of work.
exactly,
I mean,
exactly. And I think that's there's a lot to be said for, with a single mom or the guy who goes and works a job that, society wrongly doesn't see as a high level important job. But because that individual is supporting their family, that individual is able to contribute to society, that individual, I mean, there's a much higher calling here. And we really have to get away from this kind of like, well, you do that, which makes you special, and I do this, which makes me nobody. Because in God's economy, everyone is somebody, and we have to understand. And that, I think, is where the church can really step in and say, number one, they really can teach more of a theology of vocation, the idea that, work as a service, particularly work as a service to the Lord, not just being involved in a ministry, but I do everything excellently as unto the Lord, as Paul writes, rather than, work as slavery, kind of like I have to do this. I have no choice. It's just this misery and it's just destroying me. What's the alternative? The alternative is to have no job,
right,
no income, and and then that causes problems as well. And so
like
I think
to be
that's one thing.
miserable in that too.
Absolutely, and I think that I think this is one of the big calls I would have is that I think churches need to be places that are really a model for their own employees of what that ought to look like. You know what I'm saying? So boundaries are set up and mental health is offered and environments are set up to be affirming and purpose filled. And I think this is for the employees, not for the congregants. So that when a congregant comes to the church, they see happy staff members, they see individuals that have purpose and meaning, that they have people that are supported for issues that go on outside of the church. And so the church is both a place that can support people that are having trouble with burnout and things like that, but it also is it's also an employer.
Right. I mean, I think people forget that churches are
it's a business. I mean, we hate to think about it that way, but it is. So I want to talk a little bit about, as we get towards the close here, I want to talk a little bit about our Empower in the Workplace program that we have, just to kind of give you a little history of that. Back in the pandemic, we suddenly started getting phone calls from businesses here at the Hope and Healing Center, and as well as organizations that put benefit packages together for businesses. So they would put insurance packages and service packages together for businesses. And they were like, well, everybody's calling us about mental health. What do we and we don't have anything, we don't really offer anything. Do y'all offer anything? And so that's where the Empower in the Workplace program was developed. Or, Empower was originally developed to train people in ministry or in churches how to respond to people with mental health problems. And so this is a secular program, and it trains all of your employees within a workplace to learn how to recognize a mental health problem in themselves, in their family members, in those that they work with, how to make a referral. How would you connect your family member, your fellow employee to professional services? How would you relate to someone in distress? How would you talk to somebody that you work with that's having a panic attack? How would you de-escalate a situation? How would you ask questions about suicidality, things like that? And then how to kind of, connect with restorative types of opportunities within. So things like support groups and stuff like that. So those are the 4 R's that we talk about: recognize, refer, relate, and restore. And then, so everyone in a company would be trained through that level of training. That's a 2-hour training. And then we would have a set of people within the company, usually kind of safety managers, mid-management, team leaders, whoever the workplace wanted us to trained as mental health champions. And mental health champions it's a higher level of training that allows them to be someone that those individuals could connect somebody to within the company that could do a little bit deeper dive with them to kind of give them more support, to help connect them to services, things like that. And so those are mental health champions. And then we offer a variety of resources that are available to the workplace. So, things like our Hope Line, which is an evening support line, and lots of online resources, lots of databases of providers and things like that. So what we want to do is we want to make a workplace a place where individuals are able to access mental health support very quickly when they start to struggle, but also a place where everybody is kind of watching out for everybody else. They are helping their fellow employee kind of recognize that there's a problem. And then on top of that, recognizing what's going on in their families and things like that personally. And so this is I think a great program. We've done a number of companies. If you'd be interested in your company being involved, you just need to go to our Gateway to Hope website, and we'll put that in the notes for this, and you can connect there. We have staff that would be happy to work with you to get that set up. And it's, like I said, it doesn't matter the size of your company. Now, one of the things you have to understand, you might say, well, our company has an employee assistance program, and our employee assistance program offers some mental health stuff. Well, unfortunately, what the data shows nationally is that employees really just will not access mental health care through an employee assistance program. They're very concerned that they're going to be outed. There's so much stigma associated with mental health, so much shame. They're really afraid to do that. And so what this program does is it makes every employee somebody that they could connect with. So their friend that they work with on a certain team that they feel comfortable with, when they're talking to them, they're already talking to somebody that's going to be equipped to support them and equipped to move them on. The other thing about the Hope Line, which is nice, is you can call it anonymously and talk to one of our mental health coaches. You can get support over the phone. You can call as many times as you need, but you also can get referrals to mental health care providers. So there's a lot of opportunities here for connection where if you're concerned about the stigma associated with mental health, that's been taken care of. Do you have any thoughts on that, Maddie?
I think you said that well. The trainings are a great place to start if you're not sure how to engage. If you're taking a look at your work environment and you really want to address mental health and well-being and you don't know where to start, I'd say reach out and take the Empower training. It's pretty short. It's really informative, and it's a great place to start if you're really wanting to help support your employees in a way that maybe they're asking for.
Absolutely. I think it says a lot to an employee when a company says, hey, we're going to do a company-wide training that doesn't just help us from an employer perspective, you on the job, but it also will help your families and your friends. And so, that really says a lot, I think, to employees. So, well, thanks for joining us today on the Madness and Grace podcast. If you have any questions, please contact us. We look forward to seeing you on the next episode.
Thanks for joining our conversation on this episode of the Madness and Grace podcast. If you found value in our discussion today, we'd love it if you'd subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you never miss an episode.
And if you enjoyed what you heard, please consider leaving us a rating and review. It helps others find these important conversations.
Sharing this podcast with friends and family members is also a wonderful way to extend hope to those who might be struggling with mental health concerns.
We'll be back next time with another candid conversation about madness and grace. See you then.